Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today, we are talking about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and Mission Impossible Fallout, both of which were written and directed by Chris McQuarrie. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
Okay, so we are in week 7. Our Summer Impossible season is coming to an exciting climax as next week, Dead Reckoning will be out, and our patron exclusive episode on Dead Reckoning will be out and available on the Beyond the Screenplay Patreon. Also, a thing to sweeten the deal, now, moving forward, as we said last episode, all of our episodes will be available ad-free on the Patreon, so get another reason to sign up. And if you haven't heard it yet, our Asteroid City episode is also available on Patreon, so lots of reasons to sign up, not the least of which is, of course, the climactic Dead Reckoning conversation that we're all very excited about. But first, we arrive here at the penultimate Mission Impossible episode as we are looking at entries 5 and 6, the Chris McQuarrie entries into the Mission Impossible franchise. So, we've tracked this IP across all its various iterations, and Rogue Nation and Fallout are really interesting and really fun to see kind of where this IP has arrived at and kind of found its footing, which maybe makes it sound like it didn't have its footing before, but there's something that really coalesced in these two that's like, okay, now it feels like it knows what it is for good.
There's no longer a question of what the next movie in the series is going to be, whereas even after 3 and 4, it was like, well, we'll see what happens when another director takes it over.
Right. So rewatching these was really interesting, and kind of the two big thoughts that I had that I'll put out, and then we can discuss as we go around. But Rogue Nation, I feel like on paper is perhaps the most even, objectively measured, has kind of all the right things going in it in a lot of ways, but also feels like the most forgettable in a lot of ways out of the whole IP for me anyway. So that's my entry point on Rogue Nation. I love it. It's just as soon as I stop watching it, I immediately forget everything that happened. So we can get into why I think that might be the case. Fallout is an explosive, epic action movie, and I know, Alex, it's your favorite, and so we're gonna let you talk about that in just a second. But I think I have a theory why, or one of the contributing factors, because watching it this time, I was like, oh, this is Christopher Nolan's Mission Impossible. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a Christopher Nolan movie. It is shot like a Christopher Nolan movie. It's graded like a Christopher Nolan movie. The locations are locations that Christopher Nolan has gone to in several movies.
Yeah.
The music is Christopher Nolan-y. There are these montages of sort of like where music is doing all the heavy lifting and you're just sort of seeing images and it's like, oh, there's meaning happening. I don't know exactly what's happening, but there's meaning because there's momentum. The plot is confusing like The Dark Knight. There's literally a Dark Knight chase sequence where they're rerouted down. So like there's Two-Face by the end and follow. So anyway, I think because
Superman's in it.
Superman's in it. So there's a lot of Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan in Fallout that I think is really interesting as a choice for the 6th entry, and Chris McQuarrie even saying that he's the first returning director, and what he wanted to continue at least was that every movie feel like it had a different voice and a different tone, and so even though it was still him, he wanted something different. And so I think there's some really smart borrowing from techniques that have been extremely well used in The Dark Knight and other Christopher Nolan movies. So those are my thoughts. Alex, tell us about these movies.
Well, it's interesting thinking about Rogue Nation. I think I only saw it once. Like, I saw it once in theaters, and then I saw pieces of it when we made our Mission Impossible Lessons from the Screenplay video. But I don't think I'd rewatched the whole movie since that first one time in theaters. And I think, what year did it come out in? It was like 2015? Yeah, I think at that moment, I just wasn't really engaged with the franchise. I think I liked Rogue Nation fine, but I wasn't really like a Mission Impossible fan. So I think I saw it and I was like, that was good. But I didn't really revisit it. And so it was fun to revisit that movie and realize, how interesting it is in the franchise. It feels the most like noir-y, and, Ilsa is just like a classic femme fatale. And there's something very moody and kind of gritty about the way it's shot, and very dark in a lot of scenes in a way that is different from, for certainly, Ghost Protocol and also Fallout. But I think you're right, Michael. I think Fallout feels like a really fun Christopher Nolan movie of yesteryear, like from my favorite era of Nolan, which is the, Dark Knight Inception moment in his filmography. But more fun, not, there's more humanity maybe is allowed to come through than in some of those movies, just people being lovable and funny. But I think when I watched Fallout, when I first saw it in theaters, it was like, thank you. I've been waiting for this action movie for longer than I had realized. We talked about Speed at the start of this season, and there's just like, what a fun ride from start to finish. Just it committed to its premise and it just did it all the way. And Fallout to me was the same experience. Going to an IMAX theater and watching this movie, I was having a blast from start to finish. And it did carry me in that Nolan way, where just the momentum never lets up. Every sequence is executed with such confidence. Other Mission Impossible movies, you have certain sequences that really hit, and other ones that are like, I see what you're going for, but you didn't quite pull off this, the way you edited this together doesn't quite feel right, or the pacing of the scene doesn't quite feel right. In Fallout, it just feels like everything, even if it's silly, feels like it's just hitting the right note, and just keeps going. And there's a real swagger and confidence to the way it's shot and the way it moves. And so it's just so like viscerally pleasurable for me to watch this movie, because it's just such a great, confident, fun action movie. And I mean, with the exception of one sequence, which I think we'll talk about, which is the skydiving sequence, which feels like a waste of the fact that they really jumped out of a plane. So much of this movie is grounded in the reality of Tom Cruise on a motorcycle, Tom Cruise actually hanging off a helicopter. And I think they tried to start doing some of that stuff in Rogue Nation with like, look, he's actually on the side of this plane kind of for no reason at the cold open. But this movie was like the fulfillment of what we now think of as like this Tom Cruise phenomenon, which is, no, you're going to pay to see Tom Cruise actually do insane things multiple times in this movie. And the fact that he is there and is undeniable that he's there just makes those sequences just so visceral and so enjoyable in a way that I haven't felt, once again, for many years, because CG has allowed us to not have to put actors in insane peril. So I love that Tom Cruise is willingly choosing to put himself in insane peril so I can return to that 90s feeling. Anyway, I can go on, but that is why I love Fallout.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. All right. Trisha, what about you?
Well, I 100% disagree about Rogue Nation. I think behind number 1, I think Rogue Nation is probably my second favorite Mission Impossible movie, because I think 3 and 4, I really love them, but they are bumpy. Like the things that I like about, we talked about it in the last episode, there's things that I don't like about 3, even though there are things that I really do like. 4 falls apart in the third act, like very, very much. And it's a pure waste of Paula Patton and many other things. And then when I watched 5 this time around, I just like gave this big exhale and I was like, yes, like, oh, thank goodness. Oh, like I know what movie this is. And I like that it's still a heist movie in a lot of ways. Like, I don't think that Fallout is a heist movie. I feel like you'd have a hard time arguing that. I think Fallout is a hell of an action movie. It's like, what's the heist? They go to get the guy and he's in a truck, but most of that is just a chase sequence. Like, you know, most of that is like, and it's an amazing chase sequence. Like, I got up from that motorcycle chase watching it this time around and like wanted to like kick things and throw things in my house. I was like, yeah. Like, we need to get to it. When he like goes around that thing and then starts off and you see he's going to the Arc de Triomphe, you're like, oh, come on. Yes. Like, yes. It's so good. But anyway, so like I said, Fallout is an amazing action movie, but in so many ways, it's like it's like so many thousands of miles from where the series started that it's like hard for me to appreciate it on like a Mission Impossible level. I appreciate the hell out of it as a movie because I think it's an amazing movie. But like Rogue Nation still feels like it's got some Mission Impossible-y things in there more than Fallout does. And I love the introduction of the villain. I love the introduction of the Ilsa character. I love the heist centerpiece in the water tank. And then there's, you know, an amazing motorcycle chase, which is an action sequence and all of this stuff. But it just feels like it's more like even thinking about that climactic scene at the bistro or whatever, where Ilsa is there, Benji is there, he's got a bomb strapped to his chest. Like, that's more of like the thriller element rather than like everyone's just gonna punch each other or like crash helicopters into each other on the side of a cliff. I kind of like that shifting loyalty, like trust themes that are all in Rogue Nation. I like the noir elements, and I think that's well put, Alex. So I really love Rogue Nation, not to mention, and I haven't, the incredible Opera House like set piece in the first half of it. But again, that's about like, it's more like tense thriller. Yeah, there's a fist fight up like in the fly space above the stage or whatever. But it's really just like who is, you know, who's gonna shoot who and like who sees where everybody is. It's more of this cat and mouse type of thing rather again than like great big huge sequence of like we're just gonna break every stall and sink and mirror in this restroom. And like I enjoy watching that, but it's not quite Mission Impossible to me.
Rogue Nation's a chisel and Fallout's a hammer.
Scalpel.
A scalpel.
Scalpel is what you're looking for.
I said chisel because I was picturing Henry Cavill's face.
It is insane to me that Angela Bassett, fair. It is insane to me that Angela Bassett says the line, "You use a scalpel, I prefer a hammer." I'm like, girl, you prefer a hammer? You prefer a hammer. That's a crazy line for anybody to actually say. Her character is not well defined in this anyway. We can get to her later. But yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I also appreciate in Rogue Nation that since they are doing kind of the noir old 50s call outness that they, you know, her name is Ilsa. They literally go to Casablanca. Like those little details are like fun for the nerds. Of which I'm one. Brian, what are your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, I actually, unfortunately, had the word forgettable in my notes for Rogue Nation the first time I watched it. You're right. I didn't forget it. But like, yeah, it was. I watched it when it came out. I was like, that was good. And I'm glad that they're still making good Mission Impossible movies. But I also didn't go like after 3 and 4. I wasn't like, yeah, we're like, it's getting better and better. And then I rewatched it when we did our LFTS video. And I was like, that's fine. Like I had nothing negative to say about it really, other than just there was nothing sort of, I don't know, stand out about it to me. Until rewatching it the other night for this, and I was maybe because had just watched the other 4, maybe because I was just in a good mood or something. But I was like, "This is awesome! Like I'm so happy now." And I think it is some of the stuff you're talking about, Trisha, where it's like it takes a little bit more, I don't know, mental investment maybe to appreciate what's going on in that movie, to appreciate the character work, to appreciate the tension that's going on, like in that opera scene. You know, it's like that is sort of an old school Mission Impossible thing where it's not about people punching each other, just as you were saying. It's about like where is he pointing? Like how's he going to shoot? Oh, he's going to shoot the guy that he's trying to protect because like that's the best way. You know, like that is really fun. And then really getting into Ilsa's character, I think, like rewatching these movies now, just kind of knowing like the big set pieces of these movies, and now being able to watch them and just go, what are these movies actually about? You know, I'm really appreciated Rogue Nation a lot this time around. And then Fallout, I loved in the theater when I saw it, and then rewatching it this time, I had like Rogue Nation went up a notch and Fallout went down a notch, only in terms of the plot stuff that we're talking about, where I think I want to get into this later in more detail, but I think for the first half of Fallout, I'm like, what is any of this about? Like, what is anyone trying to do? I'm not really sure here, you know? But then the second half of Fallout has this like, you know, crazy big action sequence, right? But also this crazy like emotional, like, oh, you know, Mission Impossible wife is back, and you know, just like the whole like closure of that character, and then seeing Ilsa, like when you are tracking who Ilsa is over these two movies, then sort of seeing what kind of place she is in the second half of Fallout. So yeah, I want to get into the things about these two movies that I think don't grab me in the way that I would like, but ultimately, like, I'm very happy that this is where this franchise is, because it's like, if the worst thing about either of these movies is like, there are some times where I don't care quite as much as other times. If that's the worst thing,
right?
Like that's pretty good, you know? And yeah, excited to get into all of it, but ultimately, I like these movies get better with rewatching both of them for sure, and rewatching them both for this was just like, okay, I'm completely on board now. And I was already pretty on board, but I'm just like, the things that they are doing that aren't the big in your face things are actually really smart. And it sometimes takes a couple viewings to appreciate that.
Yeah, these are excellent movies. Let's just,
yes.
Just
no one disagrees with that.
Agreed across the board. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, I want to underline that I'm certainly not saying one is not good and the other is good. I'm saying they're both really good, and it's interesting to see the different ways in which my brain responds to the goodness of each of them upon different watches.
Right.
And so I think, so diving into Rogue Nation, one of the things that we've been tracking is like, who is Ethan Hunt? And is Ethan Hunt in this movie the same Ethan Hunt as the last movie? Right. And I feel like at this point, he is. Like, and there's sort of something interesting also that they're doing in the first act. You know, Ethan goes to the record store and has that kind of classic spy, like, we're going to say some code words, and do you have the blah, 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 with the girl behind the counter. And then there's that moment where she's like, it really is you. And so they're sort of building up this sort of like legend of Ethan. And I think that was kind of interesting to observe, that he's sort of like a, not quite old guard, but there's like a legend around him now. That was, just kind of an interesting way to portray Ethan. And in some ways, I feel like in both of these movies, I feel less with Ethan on his journey and more like I'm watching him. And like it's a very ineffable difference, because like it's a movie, of course you're watching it, but for some reason in these movies, kind of like what you were saying, Alex, where I bought a ticket to watch Tom Cruise do a thing. I feel like that is coming out more, especially in Fallout, but there's just sort of a different portrayal of Ethan where I'm not as in with him as I maybe was in the earlier ones. Not that I dislike him or that I'm not engaged, but it's just a slight mode shift that I feel.
I feel like it's something I noticed with this phase of Tom Cruise's career. All of his big tentpole movies are kind of about Tom Cruise, and they like Maverick, you know, is so like, you know, I'm not done yet. Movies aren't done yet, everybody. And I think this movie is kind of the beginning of that period where, like you said, it was odd to me in this watch through when there was that moment of like, you're really him. It's like, is that a Mission Impossible thing, or are other agents or like secretaries in awe of other agents? Or that seems like not cool for IMF. Everybody's like too cool for that in earlier iterations, I would think. So I think there's a little bit of a weird vibe, self-referential thing of these are also about Tom Cruise kind of, and the legend making of Tom Cruise is one of the functions of these movies, is what I project onto them, at least.
Well, to me, it's what I think is interesting is once a franchise has gone on for a couple decades, the world of that franchise in most cases has also gone on for that amount of time. So in the MCU and in like Force Awakens and, you know, with this conversation we're talking about, it's like you have characters who have heard of the hero because that hero has been a hero for decades, you know, and especially in the MCU, it's like these are superheroes flying around. So it's like you can't ignore the fact that people on the ground are going to know about them. Mission Impossible, it's kind of tricky because you're like, who does know or who doesn't know about any of these people, you know, and I think there is something about her, for me, there was something about her saying like, it's really, I even had put that as a note, like, oh, it's really you, where I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, he's been around for quite a while and he's done these crazy things, you know, 4 times before at least, right? And so it's like, it makes sense to sort of be like, look, we as the audience don't know who Ethan is in the IMF story world, you know, so I do think that gives us a little bit of grounding to be like, okay, he is actually someone notable in the story world. He's not just sort of a henchman, which he is in Fallout. Like Henry Cavill and Tom Cruise are like the henchmen in the background of that scene, which I think is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Agree with what you just said, Brian, about like the legend. It is sort of touching at something meta that I generally don't kind of like. Where the movie is now more aware of itself and how it's posturing the character as well as the star that's playing him toward the audience. And as you guys said, like, you bought a ticket to see Tom Cruise do a thing. The movie in that scene blurs the lines a little bit of like, is this Ethan Hunt or is this Tom Cruise? Do you really care, audience? Like, and you almost feel like you're losing Ethan at moments, right? Like, especially in those stunt sequences. Like, sometimes I feel like I've lost Ethan, the character, and I'm just being shown a spectacle that is incredible, and a stunt that Tom Cruise is doing that is like going to knock me over. But it doesn't, like, the stakes for what it means for Ethan, I sometimes like don't remember at all. But in Rogue Nation, immediately right after that, what happens is the big bad guy shows up and shoots that woman in the head right in front of Ethan while he's being gassed in a listening booth. And I think that's an amazingly smart screenwriting choice. It like establishes the stakes right out of the gate. And of course it gets Ethan captured, which brings him into contact with Ilsa for the first time. A flash forward or a flash to the middle where we see a villain has stolen the only woman that Ethan Hunt cares about, like, is not the only way to get emotional stakes going, or like making it personal between Ethan and a villain, right? Or like one of these central antagonists in these two films. And so I just think it's really deftly done. And it drives at, we were talking about who is Ethan Hunt. It drives at this thing that Fallout really crystallizes, because Fallout talks about it a lot in the text of like, Ethan cares about the one life, as well as the millions of lives. And so a one life that Ethan is, a couple inches of glass away from being able to save, that is taken right in front of him because of him, right? If he hadn't walked into that record store, that woman would still be alive. The fact that she's young and beautiful is just a spy movie thing. But, it's still a life that is taken right in front of him. And I think it's just like an off to the races way to start this movie and set up this villain. So I think it's really brilliant. And I love the scene right after it where, he gets captured and then we meet Ilsa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I was sort of taking these ongoing notes about the who is Ethan Hunt thing, right? And just sort of being like, every movie is about him, just as you were saying, Trisha, like saving the one. It's about, he needs to save Benji, he needs to save Luther, he needs to save the cop outside that little garage in Fallout, and I think, if Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in 3 is, I would like to do you direct harm, to your family. Solomon Lane and the Syndicate are, we're going to kill hundreds of people or thousands of people just to get what we want, so it's sort of it's that, but on a world stage, right?
The anti-Ethan.
Exactly, the anti-Ethan. And of course it's easy to say like, oh, the hero saves lives and the villain takes lives. It's like, sure, but what I like about Fallout is how much it's like really pushing, like, how far will you go? You know, they have the whole flash forward to the heist, and he's like, so I kill everyone. Like, that's the plan, you know? And you sort of get this like, is like, he's probably not going to, but like, this seems to be the only way. And then he has to kind of pretend to be, you know, this guy. He's like, oh yeah, I eat babies for breakfast or whatever he's saying. You know,
that line made me laugh so hard. He goes, I murder women and children with smallpox.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Even if you had, would you say quite like that?
Right. But yeah, so I mean, I like this sort of pushing that. It's kind of the Batman thing, right? It's kind of the like you refuse to let anyone die if you can do anything about it. So as you said, Trisha, we're going to start this duology with, you know, someone's going to die right in front of you and you can't do anything about it. And then we are going to, every time someone talks about the antagonist in this, Benji has that kind of emotional scene in Rogue Nation, but then through to Fallout, it's just like, this is what they did. These are the stakes. There are real people who suffered as a result of this. And I feel like that's the thing that makes me go, oh, okay, now I know who the antagonist is. Now I know why I hate them. Now I know why I want you to get them, etc.
Yeah, it's such a great opening. It sucked me right in, and I was like, "Oh, okay, Mission Impossible. Let's do this thing." And then, so then we get the intro of Ilsa, who's so cool.
Yes.
That first fight where they fight together is so good.
So great.
Is very fun. I had no idea what was going on, or who was who, or why anyone was doing what they were doing, which is a theme, I think, through a lot of the Mission Impossibles. But I was like the connection between them was super clear, and introducing her as this badass spy, like her. When I think about Rogue Nation, the things that I do remember and that I do remember being very engaged in is her and trying to figure out the trust and whose side is she on. Like, they play all of that really, really well. Rebecca Ferguson is perfectly cast for all of that. And it all starts in that first, that's just such a fun way to introduce and make these people meet in that context of going to be tortured. The person that's maybe going to torture you is freeing you. What's going on? And you're having this cool fight scene. The way she fights is fun. Like there's the complementary aspects of them are set up so clearly in that first scene that it then carries and like makes me invested anyway in the two of them throughout the rest of, you know, both Fallout and Rogue Nation.
And yeah, watching Rogue Nation again, I was so impressed with how well designed her story is, because, you know, her predicament, her like assignment, and all the pressures on Ilsa in this movie are perfect for a femme fatale character, because she does have to keep up appearances with the bad guy. She does genuinely have her own personal desire to finish this mission and kind of get out. And she needs, you know, things that Ethan needs in order to do that. And I just love how it allows her, by the end of the movie, to be clearly a good guy and cares about Ethan, but the competing pressures are high enough that she will have to hurt Ethan also and betray him and kind of confuse him. And I love just how many times in this movie you really are just, you don't know what her deal is, and it's all self-consistent by the end. Once you understand her assignment and what she wants, it all makes sense. And I think it's really well designed.
Yes, and it is an exemplary use of like a woman spy character that is incredibly capable, intelligent, like, but also, as you're pointing out, Alex, a full person. Yes. Where she like has a goal. She has agency. She is pursuing her own thing. And it's just like a deeply human desire, right? It's not like, I need a man to take care of me. I need this, or like, I actually have feelings for this person. As far as we know, like, she does care about Ethan, probably, but that's not the basis of their connection, right? They are thrown together into this situation where they have to act in certain ways. And if they care about each other, that's kind of not the point of any of it. Like Chris McQuarrie's direction in the way that she is framed and shot, and like, it's not like she's not an incredibly beautiful woman. She absolutely is. But it's like, it's not like a James Bond you know, like, here's a sexy woman spy, kinda, but really just a sexy woman. That's the only thing to pay attention to. It's absolutely a more, I was going to say, egalitarian look at what a woman in a spy franchise could be. So, you know, it's not like she's not ever in a beautiful dress or in a bikini in this movie. She's in both of those things. But also, like, that is not her service to the movie. She is a fully rendered character with a ton of agency, and the director, she is shot that way rather than being here to be like eye candy or arm candy for Ethan or any of the other, like, I feel like pitfalls male writers and directors often fall into when writing female characters in franchises like these.
Yeah.
I love that in Fallout, I think that continues where she has her own goals. She is in a position where, once again, she needs the thing that Ethan is after. And no matter how much she cares about him, it's her life she's putting first. And she needs to figure out how to get back in with MI6 and clear her name and not be disavowed. And that has to come first.
And it's not explicitly ever a romantic connection, right? Like, that's
right.
The other thing, is that we keep saying they care about each other because that's really all we know about how they feel about each other. Like, there's a personal connection. Is it necessarily romantic? It's not ever really made clear in these two movies.
Like, they don't actually kiss, right? We're like, he kisses plenty of other people, but not her.
Every other woman tries to do her best to kiss Tom Cruise, which, you know, respect in their own way. But, like, with her, it's like there is a very careful way that this character is treated. And yeah, like at the end of Rogue Nation, she gives him a really solid hug and says thanks. And like, that's what that is.
She like puts her hand in a fist and like rubs his hair. And she's like, she's
like, thanks, short, man. She punches him in the shoulder.
But yeah, one of our patrons asked him, he said how thrilling it is to see them truly represented as equals without feeling the need to comment on it. Right. And I like that. And I was thinking, I was like, I just, for some reason, these three words came into my mind about this sort of hierarchy of male leads versus female leads. And like traditionally, you know, especially in worse movies, like what they need to be. And I was thinking between cool, interesting, and sexy. It's like male leads, it's like they got to be cool first, right? And then you know, we'll try to make them interesting, and like they should be sexy too, but like it's fine, like as long as they're cool, right? And then female leads, it's like make sure they look good, and then if there's time, we'll make them interesting, we'll make them cool, whatever, right? And it's like Ilsa is all three of those things, but she is interesting first, you know. And I think that is the thing that makes me love that character, because it's like they're not afraid to be like, look how good she looks, look at her legs. They're so long. They're gonna be in this. They're gonna be in 25% of this movie doing stuff, and like that's great.
Well, and I would say to exactly what you're saying, she's sexy last, and
exactly. Yeah.
The costume design goes like a very long way toward that, because unless she needs to look like hot for some reason, like in the opera scene where like a gown is the appropriate thing to wear to an opera, most of the time she is actually wearing very practical clothing. She wears like she's pretty like covered up for a lot of this movie, and her clothes are like loose fitting, they're comfortable, they're spy clothes. The scene where she like is introduced and is gonna torture Ethan, maybe she's in like a button down shirt and some trousers, and she's got some cool shoes which she takes off before she does that and does that fight scene with her bare feet and whatever. It's like she's actually, I love the costume design for that character. Most of the time she's in like work clothes. Here she is in a jacket and like a suit. Her suit at the Grand Palais is amazing. Oh, cool. Yeah, again, that's very much, the character is a little bit masculine and she rules. Right.
And, you know, not to get too much into the meta, because as we usually don't do, but, you know, Tom Cruise is pretty much in charge of his own movies and what happens in them. And he hasn't really had many love interests in the past 10 or 15 years, you know, and I think that like, hopefully that's in service of what we're talking about here.
What about Jennifer Connelly?
I said many. Yeah. Like that is obviously one.
They had a sleepover in
very notable exception.
Yeah, even they stayed up and talked. But I'm saying I'm hoping that is a conscious choice in service of what we're talking about. You know, because look at Emily Blunt in Edge of Tomorrow, right? cool and sexy, but interesting. Well, maybe cool first, because goddamn is she cool in that movie. But like, but you know, it is not about like, look at this pretty girl that the guy you like is going to end up with and stuff. That's just not who these characters are. And I think, you know, and even now, if we've had this like closure with Jules, and I think if Ethan does now have a love interest, he looks pretty cozy with Haley Atwell in the trailers and stuff. But like, it feels like, okay, now we can do, like, we've earned that because we just spent like 3 movies not worrying about that. And I think that as opposed to a Bond movie or something where it's like there's 3 love interests in every Bond movie up until Craig.
Yeah.
So we meet Ilsa, and then we have this really cool heist scene in the opera house. And this sort of starts to get at what you brought up, Trisha, which is I brought up also in the first episode of like Mission Impossible movies historically have been heist movies. And Fallout, I will say, technically has a heist. Originally, I said there's none, but like they do kind of get the guy out of the truck quickly, and then it's action. It's really, interesting to see how these 2 movies kind of like bloom and evolve as they go into their second acts. And so we do have this really cool opera house. I like how contained it is. There's a very good sense of space. It's like there's, you know, the pressures that we've talked about before of there's an audience. There's just really interesting environment for all of this to be happening in. And so you're forced to be quiet and stealthy and do spy things in a spy way. There's fun, playful things with Benji where he's moving the rigging up and down while Ethan's trying to fight the guy. And it's always like putting Ethan on the back foot, which again is something that I really like about Ethan's character, is that he gets hurt and he's like, oh God, I have to do that. Like,
there's always one really big guy.
Right. Yeah. They really play that up. We talked about this in Mission Impossible 4, Ghost Protocol, where there's this sort of centerpiece heist that is then followed by a bunch of action. And it kind of amounts to nothing. We technically found like, okay, something changed. Rogue Nation, there's also a centerpiece, midpoint heist that is then followed by a lot of action. And I think there's more substance in that one, and that more happens in it. But it is like, there's also a lot more action where there's a car chase. And then when the car chase is over, there's a bike chase that happens. And the same thing happens in Fallout, where that mini heist of getting Lane out of the truck becomes a crazy getaway car chase, and then it goes immediately into, and now another like bicycle chase. That for me is the one part in Fallout where I'm like, okay, this is a little indulgent. Like, this feels a little bit like you don't need to have narratively this much action back to, like, it's 20 minutes of just people moving fast through streets. And if I recall, at one point, McQuarrie said sort of the way they approach writing and structuring these movies is, what are some cool stunts and action sequences we want to do? Mm-hmm. And now let's find a story that'll make us do that in a cool order. And so that being the approach, I think they do a really good job of creating a story with fun twists and turns that get you to those places. But I do, in these moments, feel a little bit like, the interesting stuff that Ilsa has going on, like that kind of falls by the wayside in terms of plot mechanics to get us into these places where we can now have a lot of action and a lot of stunts back to back to back to back to back to back.
But see, when the action is this good, when you actually have Tom Cruise without a helmet on, riding actually through the streets of Paris on a motorcycle, followed by an amazing second car chase where now Ilsa is after them. She's on a motorcycle. They're in a really cool old car, just going down tiny streets and over staircases. Like the best, chasings I've seen in years. What does it mean to say we don't need those things? Like, I guess maybe it's, what is the movie here for? Because like you said, yeah, I think it is clear watching Fallout, these sequences are what the movie is here for. And then it's like afterwards, we're going to kind of very quickly figure out some ways that the Henry Cavill thing makes sense. And this, that's part of the weakest part of the movie for me, is that what follows that whole Paris sequence when they're kind of in the sewers, and a lot of things happen really fast and a lot of reversals. And then we're just off to kind of middle of nowhere Kashmir.
No, you forgot about the foot chase.
There's a foot chase then that has to happen.
Right, the foot chase too. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. Maybe this is getting at the expectations of what we come to these movies for. Because you go to a Fast and Furious movie for just this and expect nothing else. Mission Impossible, we've been taught to expect more than just exquisite action sequences. They're supposed to be kind of like layers of intrigue and twists and turns. And there are stretches of this movie where we're not layering those on quickly. They're stretched out so that we can spend a lot of time on a motorcycle.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about, I think in Casino Royale, we talked about Trisha breaking down the opening foot chase and stuff, right? Of just like how all of this is like doing character work. It's doing, a lot of stuff there. And I've often said, like, if a movie is not doing character work or not doing plot work or not doing theme work and stuff, that's okay once in a while as long as I'm entertained. And you see that the most in action movies where it's like, look, the thing that needs to happen could happen in 30 seconds, but we're going to have a 5-minute action sequence to do that. And I think that's fine if you're being entertained. And this is not a judgment in positive or negative about these movies. It's just sort of a general comment on the industry, which is we can do anything now in movies using LED screens and CG and stuff. And the unfortunate byproduct of that is they really did X is not going to hit as it would if there were no other way to get that shot, right? So if I only know that like they're really doing that stunt and that stunt and that stunt because like my Twitter feed told me before I went to see the movie, right? I don't know, in the world of the movie, I don't necessarily know what's real and what isn't. If you strap a camera onto the side of a helicopter and you have Tom Cruise in there flying it around, I don't necessarily know that you couldn't get that exact same shot with him sitting in a helicopter on its stage with an LED screen in the background, And of course, McQuarrie knows that. So he has a stuntman with a camera flying out of a plane with a parachute, like, tumbling around people, right? To be like, let's make this shot look as ungettable otherwise as you can, right? But we've also seen these big CG superhero movies where their cameras flying around and stuff because none of it's real. And I don't think McQuarrie could do anything better than he did. I just think it's an unfortunate sort of state of cinema that because we can do anything through special effects, then when you really do it, your mileage may vary how good it's actually going to look on screen.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think also one of the things that I was picking up on this time around, Chris McQuarrie is a really good writer. And so these action sequences do offer moments of characterization and choice for the Ethan Hunt character, as well as for some of the other supporting characters. Ilsa often is left, has to make choices. Sometimes Benji's there, Luther's there, whatever. Like there's stuff for the characters to do that is of consequence. The thing that I like about Rogue Nation is that because so much more of the meat of the movie is about this like shifting loyalty trust situation. Can we trust Ilsa? Like, if we can't, like, to what extent are we willing to go through her to get to what we need? That motorcycle chase after the water. Okay, so there's that amazing, water tank heist. And then she jumps into the tank to save Ethan's life. Although that's also the only way she's going to get the thing that she needs. Mm-hmm. So she goes in there to get that. She does also save Ethan's life. Benji apologizes because he hadn't trusted her up until that point and says, I misjudged you. And then she immediately steals the thing and runs away and gets on a motorcycle. And then, like, he has to chase her down on the motorcycle. Again, there's much more sort of thematic weight to what's happening, right? There's just been someone we were working with. There's been a very serious betrayal. She hurt Benji to get that file away from him, the USB drive away from him. Then Ethan has to go after her. And so there's this open question about if he catches her, what's he going to do? Right? This is somebody we like. This is somebody we were loyal, like we was a member of our team up until 10 seconds ago. And so now what do we do even if we catch her? Again, to what extent do we not trust Ilsa? And what does that mean? And then that chase ends when Ilsa steps into the road directly in front of Ethan's motorcycle and he forces him to make a split second, but very significant decision about what he's going to do. And of course, he just wrecks his bike instead of hurting her. And then she just gets back on her motorcycle and drives away. Because she's exploiting this potential like care that they have for each other. Now, there's a very similar choice in Fallout where she's directly in front of their car and she's trying to shoot Solomon Lane and he runs her over, which is really funny in the moment, as is Solomon's comment, "That was Ilsa."
How interesting.
Fallout is about something different thematically. And so that choice doesn't mean as much to me at that point in that movie. Fallout also has the problem of the shifting loyalty piece is like Angela Bassett, Alec Baldwin, and Henry Cavill. And like nothing makes me like Henry Cavill at any or his character. He's such a buffoon from the first moment he steps from the Halo jump. Like, so there's never a situation where I'm like, oh no, Ethan might have to hurt that guy. Like, I'd never care about that other than the fact that he's like enormous. Like, it seems like he probably has at least 50 pounds on Tom Cruise.
Reloading his arms, his guns, the best thing he does.
His physical presence in that bathroom fight is insane.
Throughout this whole movie, there's no doubt. But it doesn't have the same sort of character, like it doesn't have the same sort of difficulty to it where Ethan's choices really feel, hard for him really in this movie. There are other moments, I guess, when they do. What would you say is the most difficult? Okay, well, are we going to get to the cop who gets wounded? Because I think that's interesting.
Nice moment.
That's probably the most interesting character choice in the movie.
Mm-hmm. I think the movie does double down on it states its theme very clearly. And there's even like a monologue at the end, almost very Dark Knight-like.
Yes.
A monologue with Angela Bassett saying, the one and the many. Yes, we don't care about Henry Cavill's character, Angela Bassett's character, as people that we like want to be good or bad. They just kind of are doing their own thing. I mean, when they first come on screen, it's almost the movie's announcing this almost cartoonish quality to them when she's just make the call. It's very big. But what I think the movie is very smart about doing is always making the bargaining chips characters. So you have Ethan dealing with the White Widow. The bargaining chip he needs to acquire to get the plutonium is the one person he does not want to help escape custody or prison. Once he has that person, that's his bargaining chip, and that's the one person that Ilsa definitely needs to kill in order to get what she wants. After that sequence, the White Widow says, oh, we just upped our price. I'm going to assume Ilsa killed my men. You need to bring her in as well. That's now the person you need to bring in along with Lane to get the plutonium you need. And I do appreciate how the movie is always kind of what we've been talking about. The Mission Impossible movies are always best when they're making Ethan make hard choices about the characters he cares about. And I do think this movie, even though it doesn't feel as interesting as in Rogue Nation with that femme fatale dynamic, the movie is always careful to make sure that we're never just after the plutonium with no character at the center of the dilemma. There's always a person that Ethan has strong feelings about that is a piece of the equation of how to reach the goal. And then, of course, it culminates in the end with his wife reappearing. And now it's like this nuke is not just going to deprive half the world's population of food. It's also going to kill my ex-wife.
I agree. And I was tuning into that in this watch through of Fallout. I think it's that I wish the machinations that put those pieces in the places that they are on the chessboard made more sense, or like weren't quite as like, the White Widow so her brother saw her men died and a lot of other men died, but 4 of them died. And she thinks that's probably Ilsa. And so now she's decided that Ilsa has to be at the things have changed. Like some of them just feel forced to get into those positions. But I agree it's better to have the characters in those positions because that does pull you in and makes it personal and interesting. Jumping back a little bit, because I'm curious, what you were talking about, Brian, in terms of like the visual effects and the stunts and the relationship of those things, because I think what you said earlier, Alex, is true that I'm okay watching a crazy car chase when I can see that it's Tom Cruise driving Sean Harris, who's tied up and can't move and is in a car with Tom Cruise and is playing perfectly Solomon Lane, just like kind of along for the ride, kind of barely bemused about what's happening. Like all of that feels real and kinetic, and it pulls me in. And so a question I just have for like listeners is like, there's no way to not be like stuck up about this, but like as normies who don't know everything about visual effects and like can't tell in a glance. I am
a normie. You could ask me. I'm right here.
I didn't want to, okay. But so like to your point, Brian, like watching these movies, I immediately know at a glance, like, okay, this helicopter shot, they're in green screen, they had to do a pickup, like, why would you do this angle there? But like, that is an IMAX camera, and Tom Cruise is flying, and this is, so like, all of those things immediately jump out at me and do affect the experience of watching these movies in this kind of meta way that does kind of band-aid over bumps that otherwise like narratively might cause problems. So I'm curious to hear from listeners and Trisha or whoever, like how much do you feel like you are tuned into those things? Because those are also the moments when I feel robbed in these movies. Like you were hinting at earlier, Alex, the Halo jump. Tom Cruise actually did a crazy Halo jump. And
they did like 20 takes because like they was out of focus or something.
Right. And like, it's an insane thing. And then they cover everything up with CG. So like when you're looking at it, most of what you're looking at is CG, except for the body of Tom Cruise flying and there's wind whipping, which you could have shot like in a wind tunnel like they did when they were practicing, and like probably shot it better if that's what you were going to end up doing, is doing CG. The heist in Rogue Nation where he goes underwater, I really want to love that sequence, but it's so filled with CG that it's just like distracting and feels like it's not a stunt to me. So these things where like being tuned in can both help and hurt your experience in different ways. And I'm curious what most people think when they watch movies, I guess.
Yeah. And, it's not an accident we see so much coverage of the stunts being done while they're filming. That way we are prepped as an audience going, oh, they really did this.
Marketing
right?
plays a huge
again,
role.
when you watch, like an MCU movie or something like that, you're going, well, I assume none of this was practical, right? Until you see like, B-roll, the Civil War. You're like, oh no, they really jumped out that window. They really did that. And it's like, but you have to sort of be told that is happening, or the average film goer, Michael, has to be told that those things are real because they're not going to know the difference a lot of the time.
Well, and I think part of what you're identifying, Michael, for people who are like us and think about these things too much and have movies ruined for us because we overthink everything when it comes to visual effects. I think part of it is also just how something's shot, because there are shots that are not possible to get in the Halo jump and in the water heist in Rogue Nation, where you've got some kind of like 360 insane, we're like moving with the arm and the water, and Tom Cruise is tumbling and Ilsa's grabbing him, and we're just going to stay on them for like this insane amount of time in a single shot. That's just not possible to shoot actually underwater with actors. And I think what feels so amazing to me and why I think I forgive so many of Fallout's faults are most of the action sequences never go into that territory. They're really well shot. They're really clear. I always can see what's happening. They're not choppy. They're not overly edited. But I also never am confronted with shots that are just actually impossible to shoot. So you have complete sequences that are incredible that I'm sure have CGI elements in them, or lots of CGI, but they are presented to me in a way in which my brain is never told this could not be shot. And that includes a good deal of that final helicopter chase. Definitely near the end, it gets pretty insane when they're crashing and falling and all that stuff. But most of that chase, I could not tell you for sure what is CG, what isn't. And just the clarity of those IMAX cameras is just so special. So I think, once again, I like action movies, and it's been sad that I feel like for decades, I haven't liked most action movies. And I think it's because of this, because most action movies are full of impossible shots of impossible things. And so I just don't feel them. And this movie, for the most part, like I feel and love the action throughout the entire sequence because of the way it's shot and because of the commitment to the in-camera elements that are undeniably in camera.
Yeah, Alex, I'm with you. I think I can't tell most of the time. Like there are things that I notice in the water tank. There are things that I notice at the end of the helicopter chase and the halo jump that don't look right to me, and I assume they're fake. But also, I assume they're doing as much as they can in camera, and so I just give them good faith currency. And that's, I think, your point, Brian, which is like, they told me it's all real before I came in and sat my butt down in this chair. So I'm just going to believe they did the best they could to get as much of it in camera as they could. And I don't know if that's how the average audience member feels, but shot to shot, I can't tell, is my point.
Yeah. Okay. Just like I watched the Paris car, like the motorcycle chase, and I'm like, this would be cool if any of those cars were real. He's just driving fast in an empty, like.
There are a few too many CG cars in that chase, but
yeah.
I still love it.
But yeah. Anyway. Okay. Well, I will continue to wrestle with myself.
Me and you problems, Michael.
Yes. So here we are at the end of the franchise thus far, going into Dead Reckoning. We've talked about Ethan's evolution and his team and heists versus action and all these different things. What are our predictions and or wishes for Dead Reckoning Part 1 and I guess Part 2 as well? Brian, what do you want? What are you thinking?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of going in very open-minded in terms of not really needing a lot. I guess the things that come to mind are, I hope Ilsa's legs are a character as they were in Rogue Nation, just kicking ass all over the place. I hate to say it, but I feel like I'm ready for Jules to sail off into the sunset, at the end of Fallout.
Oh, I don't think we'd see her again.
Yeah, they gave her
I would hope so.
Such beautiful closure, and like the fact that she gives permission to Ethan, like more that she forgives him for putting her in this mess in the first place.
It was all worth it.
Look at my life. Isn't this great? And it's like, is it?
You almost died in a nuclear explosion.
Multiple times.
Yeah. All worth it.
Yeah. And as I think I mentioned last time, there's a lot of characters sort of being shown, character posters and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like that can be a problem. This seems like this is trying to do like the Infinity War Endgame thing where it's like, hey, we're bringing people back from the old movies. We're introducing new characters. And then, we'll see what happens. I just hope all of that is balanced well. And I don't feel like I have to pay attention to all this. We're starting to get into the franchise problem where it's like, hey, look, it's Jules. Remember her from what, 12 years ago? If you've watched the franchise, then obviously, like if you know the franchise well, then Jules showing up in Fallout is a huge deal, right? If you haven't and you just watch the movies when they come out in theaters, you're like, what is going on? We're bringing characters back, as we know from earlier movies in Dead Reckoning. And so I just hope all of the character stuff is handled well, and we don't spend a lot of time in the weeds with lots of new people and all their stories and what's going on with them. But we have, 6 hours of movie over these two movies to deal with all of it. So hopefully there's enough time for everyone to kind of have their moment, but also not make things too confusing, right? And then the last thing I'll say is I don't know what they have talked about, but certainly this Part 1, Part 2, like, is this the end-ish? Like, is this the end of a chapter? Is this the end of it's not gonna be the end of the franchise because they're not gonna never make another Mission Impossible movie, but is this a closure for Ethan or for this sort of first, 8 movies in this franchise, which sounds weird to say. But yeah, so I'm very curious, and we won't know until Part 2 what the sort of goal is here, but I'm very curious to see where we are at the end of these two movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Trisha, what about you?
Yeah, I've been in full dark, like ostrich mode on this. I have not watched anything. I have not read anything. So my predictions are pure speculation based on nothing. But I would like for there to be one really good heist. I want a heist, man. Like, please give me a really good planning stage. I want like a team assembly thing going on. I want to know sort of what the plan is, but then I want it to go really bad, and it's got to be like stealthy. There should be like masks in the heist. I want there to be like everybody has to do a certain thing like at a certain really narrow amount of time, and it should be like physically impossible to do, and then they like pull it off. I just would love a really good centerpiece heist. That's just my hope and dream. I don't know if that's realistic anymore, but I would really enjoy that. And I predict there to be, like I said, Chris McQuarrie is a good writer. This is going to be a well-written movie. It's going to be well executed. It's going to be a lot of fun. And that's part of the reason I'm so pumped for it. Whether or not it'll be like an old school Mission Impossible movie, I have no idea. I assume that it will blend a few elements from across the franchise. I've noticed some references this time around in Rogue Nation and in Fallout to earlier Mission Impossible movies.
Like Vanessa Kirby being Max's daughter, which I missed entirely the first time.
By the way. What in the hell? Right. I was like, are you related to Vanessa Redgrave? I don't understand. Very, very well cast. But even just, we were recently, we did the watch along on Discord of Mission Impossible 2, and there's references to Mission Impossible 2 stuff, later in Rogue Nation and in Fallout, not the least of which is all the motorcycles. I think there's going to be a lot of study and very well executed story and action sequences. And it'll probably be convoluted and hard to understand the first time around. And it'll probably be a little too long, but it's going to be a good ride. That's my prediction.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think, because we were talking about how McQuarrie said that he wanted each film to feel a little bit different. And I'm thinking about what is the shift into this next one. And my impression from just the teaser images and just the general vibe I've gotten from the marketing is epic. If Fallout was just the most momentum filled action ride, I feel like there's a scope I'm sensing from Dead Reckoning. It's a 2-part huge thing. I think epic might be the word, and I'm not sure how that manifests in the Mission Impossible universe, but I'm excited to see what the Lord of the Rings epic is of the Ethan Hunt story.
IMF is supposed to be secret. I just want to say this. It's supposed to be a secret organization. This feels less and less secret as it goes along.
It could also be fun and interesting if part 1 is more in the Fallout mold of action movie. And if part 2, once, all the dominoes are in place, actually we finish this Ethan Hunt franchise with the ultimate heist, back to the beginning, emotional stakes at their highest. That could be a really fun development. But I don't know, maybe McQuarrie's we're just doing Fallout 2 and 3. Which I'm also fine with because it's great action.
Yeah, it was interesting, Michael, that you said that McQuarrie wanted them to feel like different movies, specifically with Rogue Nation and Fallout, because it's it's the first time the same director is doing it. And I think it's interesting because he is easily the least stylistic director in this franchise, and I think that's a good thing because I think it's going to make these movies age well,
right.
I think my least favorite thing rewatching Mission Impossible 3 was this is they're doing some of that cool stuff you did in the mid-aughts, that feels a little outdated now. And I think that we're not going to feel that way in 15 years about the McQuarrie movies. But I'm also curious to see to Alex's point, how is Dead Reckoning going to feel like Dead Reckoning? If Fallout feels like Fallout and Rogue Nation feels like Rogue Nation, are these two movies going to feel like sort of a mishmash of just the McQuarrie-ness, or are they going to kind of have their own style to them? And are they going to feel separate from each other? It'll be all interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah. My cautious optimistic read of it is that I think we might get all of the above. Like, I feel like that's, it feels like those two, McQuarrie and Cruise, like, would want to concoct that for us, where we get, I would love some of that, you know, neo-noir erotic thriller spy time heistiness of the original, and even like the images that I've seen of Ethan, he kind of looks a bit more like he did back in the original, in the first one. I'd love to have that the equivalent moment from the original heist, where it all, like, everything's quiet and it comes down to a water drop, like, falling or not. Like, bring us down to that tiny moment at, like, the pinnacle of the heist, so that you can then blow us away with your Falloutness. Like, I think there's room in these two to do everything that we have come to want from the Mission Impossible franchise. And I'm going to be hoping that that is what we get from all of it.
Yeah. When I said epic, I think that's kind of what I meant. Like, it's going to be big enough to contain it all somehow. Yeah. is the hope.
Yeah. Well, we will find out very soon. Listeners, next week, our episode on Dead Reckoning Part 1 will be available to patrons. So head over to the Beyond Screenplay Patreon to sign up and listen to that. I can't wait to watch and talk. It's going to be really, really fun. What lessons are we going to take away from Rogue Nation and Fallout? Trisha, should we start with you?
Sure. I am just going to come back to that moment in the middle of the Paris chase in Fallout with the traffic cop, which she's like a meter maid, basically. And you don't need that scene. You don't need it, right? Like, it ultimately does like a tiny bit of narrative work in the way that you pointed out, Michael, where it's like, well, now these guys are dead and White Widow's mad about it. You don't strictly need it to go down the way it goes down. What it's doing is pure character work that is actually pure thematic work. And I remember watching this movie in the theater, and there was this sense of like everybody in the theater kind of sitting up and being like, oh my God, right? And the sound, like, it, you know, there was this like driving action music and all of this stuff. And then it just kind of like, when those doors slide open and that lady cop is standing right there. And it is, I don't want to say it's simple, but it's exemplary. Like, action movies, modern action movies could easily do that kind of scene. Because it leads into, like, it's really just this brief interval in the middle of, you know, sandwiched between two chases. You easily could do it. But a lot of modern action movies just don't bother because they don't have anything to say. So there's not a thematic thing that they want to explore or a choice that they want to have the character make at that moment. And as a result, audiences tend to forget why we're watching a sequence, right? Like, I know that they have Solomon and Lane, and like, I guess I hope they don't get caught by the cops or the bad guys, the Widows guys.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the same like care or gravity to it as when there's just an average person that's being put into harm's way by the actions, the literal action that is taking place in the scene. And so I think it's really well done. I think it's incredibly well acted. It's a nice little acting moment for Tom Cruise. He doesn't get to do very much acting. Like, not that stunts are not acting. I'm not going to say that because they are. And like a lot of the way that, even in the dialogue scenes, I think he's given more to do in Rogue Nation, which is why I like it. But, you know, fighting with Henry Cavill in a helicopter or between helicopters for a while. Like, actually, I do like him in that helicopter sequence because he spends a lot of time talking to himself in a way that is really funny.
It's being pushed to the limit because he's like, he puts so much pressure on himself, and this is like the ultimate, like, everything will go wrong if I don't do the thing. And I like how far Tom Cruise is playing that, just like almost like beating himself up to like keep going because he can't fail. Well,
and Chris McQuarrie's both of these movies are good at finding the humor and they make Ethan relatable, right? Where it's like, he is not perfect. He often messes up or has to improvise or whatever. And so like he gets into a helicopter and we're like, oh yeah, of course he knows how to fly this. And then he definitely does not know actually how to fly it, which is fun, right? But all of that to say, in terms of acting, I think that moment sticks with people, and it stuck with me the first time I saw it, and sticks with me now. And again, it's just, if you're writing an action movie, finding out what it's about, like what is it all about, and finding places to put that into the action sequences, that is the thing to do. That is the reason why we will ultimately care.
It's giving everything else meaning, and when your action has meaning, it's that much more thrilling.
It's a theme.
Yeah. It's great action dynamics construction, because we just had loud, 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 and so now we can have quiet, 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 so we can have loud, loud, loud again. But we're also, as you're saying, theme physically represented. Ethan is choosing to kill the bad people for the good. Like, we're seeing him literally enact his belief system. Like, and it's just really well done.
Yep.
Yeah. Brian, what's your lesson?
So I want to talk about the MacGuffin for a little bit, and to clarify what that is for anyone who needs a refresher, doesn't know. It's a word that means a plot device that is sending the characters forward to go do something, but the audience isn't necessarily worried about it. It's just, we got to get the characters to go do something, right? So it's the Lost Ark, it's the Shankara Stones, it's the Holy Grail, it's the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny. And I think in these movies, there's always something, right? We got to go get the knock list. We got to go get literally plutonium. Like, we got to, or like do it. We got to do a thing. And we're not necessarily expecting the audience to care about that thing. We care about the characters, or we care about what that thing gets them in the bigger picture. And I think JJ did a really interesting, probably almost definitely on purpose, like deconstruction of the MacGuffin with the rabbit's foot, right? Where he is basically going, you and Ethan Hunt are not going to know at the end of this movie what that thing even was, because I don't care about it. You don't care about it. What you care about in this movie is these characters and their survival, and Ethan protecting his family and his friends, etc. So like, you literally put a line at the end of the movie. What was the rabbit's foot? I don't know, And I think that is smart, because I think that it's showing an understanding that the MacGuffin is not, we don't really need to understand it a lot of the time. And I feel like with these two movies, where I engage with them the least is when the MacGuffin is the thing that I am supposed to care about the most. By which I mean kind of the first half of Fallout. There's sort of these layers of like, look, on an emotional level, this bad guy kills innocent people, and this good guy wants to save lives, right? But we've got to get X in order to recover Y, in order to sell Z to this person, so that we can do this thing, And Alex, you pointed out that a lot of times the way that they get around that is by putting Luther in harm's way, by putting Benji in harm's way, right? Like, it's like, okay, yes, we have to go do the MacGuffin thing, but now one of my friends' life is at risk, and we have to worry about that, right? But there are times in all of these movies, and in all, I think, big action movies, there are times where the only thing in my immediate understanding that I'm supposed to be caring about is some imaginary plot device that I don't really care about. And I think that's okay, because movies do that. But I think that it is great when they find ways to make that not be the only thing that is of interest. So I either have an incredibly visceral understanding of what this device is going to get me in terms of my emotional through line of the movie, or the obstacle, or someone's life is at risk, or like there's something else going on that is making me be more emotionally invested than if all I'm caring about is that these characters are going to go get a Mission Impossible 1, that heist. Like, I don't care whether or not they get the knock list. I care whether or not they get caught. Like, that is the thing that is driving you emotionally. You're not like, man, I hope they get this list. You're going, no, I hope they get out of this in one piece, right? Because I'm so invested in these characters and the fact that, yes, they want this thing over here, but I care about them more than I care about that thing.
So it's interesting, because my lesson is sort of the opposite, but also agreeing in some ways, where, because I was thinking about also the MacGuffins in these movies, and when I am caring about them more than when I'm not. And I think one of the things that I was extracting, and I haven't fully tested this, but it seems like in the movies where there is an object that is the MacGuffin, it's a lot easier for me to be invested in them getting it versus like a person. So like, we need to stop Lane, and then there's like some stuff that falls off of Lane, like, oh, Lane has a ledger, we'll introduce that right before the heist, and that's what we care about now. Or and Ghost Protocol is sort of the same thing, where it's like there's a crazy guy that wants to blow stuff up, and we're kind of after him generally, and the parts that fall off of him, which is, oh, he has a scientist and he has the codes, but it's kind of all about this guy. I kind of don't care about that guy at any point. The objects, though, for some reason, help give a focus, which I think is helpful in a spy movie, kind of the way we talked about in like the Apocalypse Now episode, where like something just a very simple plot construction of like Apocalypse Now, where it's like, you're here, we're going to go there. And that's the movie. And having something like the knock list or the plutonium and Fallout, where it's there from the beginning of the movie all the way to the end, like it's all about the one thing the whole time, I find gives me something to hold on to. And I think that's part of the purpose of a MacGuffin. Is like, here's the framework so that you can focus on, like you were saying, Brian, the characters and the stuff that's actually going to like bring you in. And when there's not enough clarity in the plot MacGuffin, I find myself trying to search for it and figure it out. And so anyway, that was kind of my lesson. Is like, if you're going to do a MacGuffin in a Mission Impossible movie, I like it when it's there from the beginning and it's the goal the entire time, personally.
Right. I think we're talking about two different ways you can remove the connection, right? Is you're talking about if it's too complicated and I just don't understand what the thing is, then I'm going to be sort of emotionally removed from it. And I'm talking about the sort of more direct emotions of like, do I actually care about the thing in the first place, right? And I think that's the sort of movies get, and these movies don't do this, but the movies just get so in the weeds with like the complexity of what the thing is and what they have to do and that kind of stuff that you're like, I'm so lost that I don't know what it is. So it's like, yeah, making it just a simple object like you're talking about makes it a lot easier to understand.
Yes. And I always, whenever I'm talking about this with people where I'm trying to explain what MacGuffins are, there are actually two varieties from classic film. One is the Maltese Falcon, which we literally never know what it is ever. And it's just an object that doesn't mean anything. And the other is the Letters of Transit, which means something that is incredibly significant. And so it's like these movies have both kinds of MacGuffin in them. The Rabbit's Foot is a Maltese Falcon. Who cares? No one cares.
Right.
But then plutonium is the Letters of Transit. It's crystal clear what that means and what it is worth. And so I think that the movies are at their best. The knock list is also a Letters of Transit, right? It's told us from the beginning, if bad guys get this, lots of people die. We totally understand what it means. And so I think a crystal clear understanding of the MacGuffin's thing, like the Rabbit's Foot, they could just go, well, it's a doomsday device, which is basically what Benji does. He tells a whole little story about it, but he just goes, well, it's a doomsday device. But it's not enough, right? It has to have like actual meaning to us and to the characters in order to like move into that category of being worth something on its own.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why the Fallout opening does do a really good job of both kind of embodying the theme of the movie with he does make a choice to let the plutonium go to save Luther, and then shows us the fake fallout of the consequences that you could potentially face by choosing the one over the many. And it's big, it's a little goofy the way that all plays out, but I do think it's effective in showing, this would destroy Ethan if he was responsible for 3 major cities being bombed with nukes because he made a choice that was the wrong call. And so that's part of why, the MacGuffin in Fallout does feel more, emotionally intense, because that first cold open really shows us what could happen.
For sure.
And when it's there the whole time, that gives you an opportunity to imbue it with meaning. In the original Mission Impossible, his whole team dies trying to get the stock list.
Right.
Luther, like all that, so that by the end, you're like, no, you've been trying to get this thing this whole time. And it's, yeah. Okay, and take us home, Alex. What's your lesson?
So my lesson is kind of a question of when does it make sense for a franchise to do the Batman versus Superman thing, which is like, remember in the last movie when you blew up a huge area, like that has consequences. And I think I was a little thrown off rewatching Rogue Nation, where we had the whole Senate hearing or whatever with Alec Baldwin going through like, look at this heist you did, look at this heist you did, like look at all these crazy things that happened. I think because, and then there's also this effort to justify the 60s goofiness of the IMF by trying to make people in the world of Mission Impossible acknowledge it and say, you're guys in Halloween masks, you're out of control. I almost wish films like this, where the franchise is built on admittedly kind of outlandish things like these amazing masks that just look like a human, wouldn't like call attention to the fact that they're in kind of a strange universe and just commit to it. Like just the IMF, the Impossible Mission Force is just a thing.
Yep. And
people in the world aren't like, wait, that's what it's called? Like in Mission Impossible 3, when he tells his wife, she's like, wait, you gotta be kidding me. And I think it's just my one issue with some of these movies is like, it's a franchise thing. It feels like you've been around long enough. You got to start now reflecting back on the earlier movies and trying to like incorporate them into a real world. And I don't know how I feel about it. I think it does make sense for there to be this high level tension with the CIA. It creates conflict. It creates situations like the Angela Bassett, whatever she's doing. So I get why you want to have, B plot, C plot in that world of the organization. But the IMF is so goofy that I almost just don't want to call attention to it. And I think Rogue Nation was in an interesting place. And even the way it concluded, where Alec Baldwin is giving that speech of like, Hunt is the very embodiment of destiny. It's like, where are we landing here? Is this a real world, or is this like a goofy world? And what are we doing here? So that's not really a lesson. Maybe it's a franchise question of, do franchises have to do this at a certain point, acknowledge the city destruction that happened in the previous superhero movie? Because Marvel did it too. It was like, you lifted up Sokovia, like, how dare you? So I just don't like, does anybody like that? Does it enhance our experience, or do we just want to believe in a world where entire countries are lifted up and that's just part of the world?
It's definitely in vogue at that time. And definitely, I think, dealing with, as culture evolved, the cultural baggage that comes from having a legacy thing. Bond did, like, all of them, I feel like, had to like do some inward looking, and sometimes
very similar
came out
Skyfall
like
scene where there's like an inquiry.
Right. Yeah. I want to add one more prediction or more question for Dead Reckoning. Will Ethan be disavowed? Because has he ever not been disavowed? Like in any of the movies, does he ever not go rogue? Will
IMF stop existing again?
Right. Like,
yeah, I kind of want them to not dissolve IMF anymore. Can we just like let it be?
Well, who's in charge now? Because Alec Baldwin dies in Fallout, and Angela Bassett is in charge now.
You haven't seen the teaser trailer, Trisha?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
It's Kittredge. Oh, it's Kittredge. He's back, right?
But is he a president, or is he?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I am excited actually just to see Kittredge again.
I just want to listen to Kittredge to say things. I want them to turn the camera, like Dutch it all the way.
I want him manning a radar station in Alaska by the end of the day.
Yes.
Tom Cruise is going to make a face at him that makes like a muscle twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to be
Love
great.
it.
Yeah. I'm here for it. I am here for it. What else have you guys been watching? Brian, what have you been watching recently?
So I just burned through all 3 seasons of The Other Two, which is a show on Max. And the main characters, the other two, are these 20-somethings, man and woman. They are the siblings of a 13-year-old kid who becomes an overnight Justin Bieber pop star, basically. So their lives are already just a mess and they can't figure their stuff out. And then their 13-year-old brother becomes like way more successful than they've become in their twice as many years. Their mom is played by Molly Shannon, who also starts to become famous. So then that becomes, its own thing. Ken Marino plays the kid's manager, and he's great, just doing his sort of desperate Ken Marino thing. And yeah, it's interesting. The show, I think, is at its best when that setting is just the backdrop for the show and you just really care about like what these characters are going through, but then also that setting allows for all sorts of like fun celebrity cameos and like weird events that you wouldn't get if they weren't in this like weird situation that they're in. So yeah, I really liking it, and it's sort of absurd at times, and then it's also one of these shows that every once in a while is like, hey, guess what, we're gonna do like an actual real talk emotional thing here, and you're like, I was not expecting that right now. So it's in that sort of quirky Office, Parks and Rec way where because it's so sort of absurd that when it's not, it suddenly like is jarring in like a really cool way. So yeah, the other two on Max.
Nice. Cool. All right. Alex, what have you been watching?
I am starting season 2 of The Bear on Hulu, which is, great show.
No spoilers.
If you watch season 1, yeah, I only watched the first episode so far, but I am happy to report that it is back and is great. And I think one thing that's standing out for me going back into the show is just, I think what makes it so special is the amount of love you feel the creators have towards the characters. There's like a really, it's both a very rough Chicago, stressful, crazy environment, but there's a real love beneath it all. And there's a moment in the first episode of season 2 where a character just like smiles really big for an extended shot because they're so happy about something that just happened to them. And in the midst of like an otherwise kind of like cynical Chicago stressful environment, those moments feel even more special and earned.
Nice.
Okay.
Tricia, what have you been watching?
Yeah, I have a submarine movie for you guys.
Another one.
I know. I keep finding more, and then I'm like, well, I have to watch this one now, and I have a whole brand about it, I guess. No, but I saw this movie Below from 2002. It's directed by David Twohy, which is the director of Pitch Black, which is another one of my favorite movies, with Matthew Davis, Bruce Greenwood, Olivia Williams, and Holt McCallany. Are all in this movie, as well as Zach Galifianakis in like a minor role. This is like a period film. It's set during World War II, and it's a horror movie also, kind of. I don't know, man. It was really scary, actually. But I really, really liked it. I mean, there were stretches of it that I was like, kind of halfway not watching. Because they were so upsetting to me because, it's just like, this movie was sort of like Pitch Black. I'm not going to say it's particularly sophisticated in its like horror techniques, but there's like more to it in terms of characters than there needs to be. Like, it's better than it needs to be for sure. And I don't know, I just really liked it. Like, Pitch Black, I love. And this movie I also really, really liked. So it is a horror movie. I'm not going to say anything about where it goes.
Is it below?
Definitely takes some unexpected twists and turns. It doesn't go above. We'll put it that way. But yeah, I really liked it. So Below from 2002.
Nice. Really want you to make an erotic thriller period submarine heist movie.
Yes.
I'm on
All
it.
of it.
I'm on it.
I would pay lots of money to see that.
Co-written by Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah.
I am late to the party, but I watched the movie The Handmaiden, the Korean film. And I knew like very little about it, and I think that's great. So I don't want to say too much about it, except watch it. There's a lot of it's seduction and thrilling and just so many things. I don't know. I feel like I can't talk about it without like spoiling everything. But it was like an emotional ride. It's rare in a movie where I literally have no idea what's going to happen next.
Yep.
Like completely jaw dropped. Like, wait, what could possibly, wait, what? So if you like those feelings, watch The Handmaiden. It's really, really good.
Yes.
Very, very sexy.
It is. Yes.
Be prepared.
Don't watch it with like your parents or your children. Or I mean, just
It is a sexy movie.
yes.
No.
But it's interesting and cool also.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's sexy first. I want to
Sexy,
say. Well,
sexy first. Yeah.
Oh boy. All right. Well, this has been our conversation about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and Fallout and the whole Mission Impossible franchise. I think we've discussed a lot of really cool things, and it's going to be so hard to talk about Dead Reckoning and bring all of this through, but I think there's a cool framework in place for us to watch and react and pick that apart, which I'm very excited to do next week.
We're all seeing it together, right? Yeah, we're all going to be in the same
yes,
IMAX
I can't
theater.
wait. And then we will walk out
Yes.
and not talk to each other at all.
Somehow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just to hold our thoughts for 24 hours until we can record.
Yes.
And then Alex is going to text me the afternoon the next day and say, I'm going to go see it again before we podcast. Do you want to come? And I'll say, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not out of the realm of possibility.
Do we need a seating chart? What's the optimal... Listeners, design us a seating chart with the four of us. What is the order that we should be sitting in when we're watching Dead Reckoning?
This is something I'm going to need to think about.
I want to sit as close to Alex as possible because he is infectious as a co.
Just sit under his chair.
I am a reactor. I am an audible reactor to movies I am enjoying.
It is true. I feel like the best example of that was, I think it was Fast 5 or was it Fast 6 that we saw in the ArcLight Theater, and it was just the right crowd that was ready for just an absurd fast movie, and I feel like you were leading the charge of like giggling and laughing at the absurdity, and like the crowd just yelling "Kiss, kiss" whenever The Rock and
Yeah, that was when I knew we were in the right crowd.
Right.
When
Yeah.
they were yelling "Kiss" at The Rock and Vin Diesel.
Anyway,
Amazing.
we want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons that make this show possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major, to our editors, Donovan Bullen, Caleb Berg, Graham Harther, and Eric Schneider. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet and send us a seating chart, and we will see you in the next episode, our patron exclusive for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, Part 1.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.